This is Enel, the false god of Skypiea and an entity completely unknown to those inhabiting the Blue Sea, and quite thankfully so, because they have no idea the sheer destruction and ruin that he could call upon them. Enel is a fantastic One Piece villain whose greatness is masked by the Iron Curtain of Skypiea, a traditionally overlooked arc that almost 20 years after it concluded turned out to be one of the most absurdly important pieces of world building, and Enel is no exception. And we're going to re-examine him today because we're on a mission to rank every major antagonist in the most comprehensive and exhaustive way possible, video by video, today featuring God Enel. So Enel probably has one of the most uniquely fearsome introductions in all of One Piece, because we don't actually see him. We don't get to see him for quite some time. But oh my crap do we experience him. Because whilst on what she thought was a lovely sky holiday, Nami rides to Upper Yard and witnesses an act of God. An impossibly powerful and focused shaft of lightning descending from the even higher above the clouds that they already are, in order to smite a sinner. It plays very strongly towards the religious themes of the arc, because a lot of times when people share their experiences of God, they tend to be very isolated and personal, which is what Nami experienced here on her own away from the other Straw Hats. So two very important things about this. The first is that Oda deliberately chose Nami to be the first witness, because within the crew she has the best mixture of pragmatism and powerlessness, which makes her an ideal audience surrogate. And I think it's very powerful being able to take someone so grounded in tangible realism and then immediately making her question her core beliefs of the world. Because after this experience, she returns to the Straw Hats fully prepared to believe that the gods exist. And the second important thing is that, let's say those gods exist, that's bad because we've now angered them. Because Nami overheard Enel's priest discussing the Straw Hats, or as they refer to them, illegal trespassers, meaning that the Straw Hats are now the enemies of the gods, a concept that would eventually tie very neatly into the will of D. No admiral, no warlord, no emperor of the sea has ever been able to achieve this depth of terror upon introduction. Because when it comes to all of them, we at least knew that they were living, breathing, and probably killable beings. But with Enel, we have no concept of whether or not he's even human, which is emphasized by the silhouette we see of him shortly after. We see what resembles maybe human features, but Oda has crafted it in a distinctly alien style. There's no emotional expression, nothing to indicate any kind of humanity, and overall it's something that we can't connect to. Almost like staring up at the statue of a deity. And whilst we as readers aren't meant to, fully buy into this because you're all very clever, you know from the beginning that something's up in this, Enel is probably not all he seems. Even then, on first read through, you still can't help but wonder, yeah, but what if? Because in the very next chapter, we have another experience of the seemingly omnipotent god sending another blast of focused lightning to strike down Konus. And whilst Luffy does save her, this feeling of powerlessness is one that we're not quite used to in One Piece. We are dealing with something completely out of our depth. The fact that you could be struck down anytime, anywhere, for seemingly any reason is the pinnacle of threatening. It's such a gripping and compelling introduction to a villain, and we still haven't actually met him yet. Now, if that's all there was to God Enel, then I would give him a perfect 10 out of 10 for threatening right here and now. But the idea that Enel's designed to explore is a bit more complicated than that. When we do finally meet Enel, he is a spoiled, bored, entitled man-brat who genuinely believes that he was born as a god with a divine right to rule. And if all of that sounds a little bit familiar to you, it should, because Enel is a prototype for the world nobles, and his existence is a miniature world government all rolled into one. Now, some people may be offended by my comparison of Enel to the world nobles because of his power. He's strong in everything, but they're not really that different. Enel does possess a Logia-type devil fruit that allows him to conjure, manipulate, and become lightning, which allows him to personally smite, but the world nobles have access to 3 marine admirals that they can summon at any point and do more or less the same thing, but probably worse. They also both believe that they're untouchable. The world nobles have this divine sense that no lower being would dare enact violence upon us, whereas Enel just thinks that it's physically impossible because of his divine Logia fruit. But when it comes down to it, if either Luffy or a world noble is facing a punch from Luffy, then they're both getting hit pretty hard. And even though Enel is essentially invincible against anyone else, when facing Luffy, he has about the same chance of winning as someone like St. Charles. Force. Luffy's rubber body is the natural counter to Enel's devil fruit. And you know why that is? It's because he is the enemy of the gods, which puts Enel in a bit of a tricky position. Because during Skypiea, he's both the most threatening villain we've encountered to this point, as well as one of the least threatening, because he can't even begin to stand up to Luffy. So whatever our experience of Enel's godlike powers were, is now Enel's experience of Luffy's ability to casually backhand him into oblivion. And this is a situation in One Piece where I do think that we've sacrificed the villain for the sake of the idea, which is not a bad thing. The idea should always be paramount. But it's really important to note that Enel is not designed to be your typical epic shonen antagonist. He's here to explore the idea of a false god, a cardboard cutout, a being who appears fearsome at a distance on stage with all of the right lighting and fun smoke effects, but in reality is incredibly fragile and poorly constructed when you get up close to really examine him, which again works perfectly for the arc. The idea, in my opinion, is executed immaculately, but I can definitely see why Enel leaves a lot of people wanting a little bit more from him as a traditional shonen challenge. And to be real, a lot of Enel is more difficult to appreciate in the moment because Skypiea is an arc that compounds exponentially in the context of everything that comes after. For example, the beautiful idea that Enel, the false god, is ultimately overcome by Luffy, the actual sun god, is something that really won't resonate until Wano. And there's all sorts of mind-blowing dialogue in Skypiea that takes on a completely different meaning now. Like during the final fight with Enel, Luffy says, "Here we are on this nice sky island, and you go and make the weather all thunderstormy and nasty. You thunder freak?" So the first time you read this, it feels like very classic Luffy. He's simplifying a very complex problem down to his own personal annoyances. But then you go and read this post-Wano, and it's like a declaration from the sun god himself, almost willing the sun back into existence by dispersing Enel's attack and screaming, "Let the sun shine." I don't want to get into this too deeply because we've now entered more general Skypiea arc territory, and I want to keep this focused on Enel. But all of this is to say that the role he plays and what he represents is much easier to appreciate in retrospect. So my next criteria for a solid antagonist is having an understandable motivation. And this is where I think Enel gets a bit misunderstood. Earlier I compared him to the world nobles, and one of the very purposeful decisions Oda makes with them is to portray them as almost comically black and white evil villains. They don't have overly complex motives, they do bad things because they're innately bad people, and they believe that they have the divine authority to exercise their desires to do all of the bad things. It is actually a little bit worse than that, because both Enel and the world nobles assert that they have a divine duty to subjugate the unblessed. But it's not something that they believe in to the core of their being. It's more of an excuse to do horrible things. In the case of the world nobles anyway. With Enel, there's quite a bit more to it than that. At the climax of the survival game, God Enel generously graces the finalists with an explanation as to why he's being such a prick and intends to destroy Skypiea. And he actually has some pretty powerful words. The roots of this conflict are much deeper than you know. Think about it. You are not clouds, but you were born in the sky. You are not birds, but you live in the sky. The foundation of this country in the sky is unnatural. Land is the place for land, humans have a place for humans, and a god has a place for God. Each has a place to which it must return. So Enel believes that the fundamental order of life has been unnaturally shifted. Land shouldn't be in the sky and humans should not be occupying the space of birds. It's weird. So in order to fix this, Enel has crafted a weapon of mass destruction, not to return the land and the humans to where they belong, but to punish and eradicate them for breaking the natural order to begin with. Unlike the world nobles, Enel isn't just being a prick by unzipping his pants and waving around his divine rights. He's actively trying to restore the order he believes in. And I think it's a pretty damn solid motivation for someone who literally believes himself to be a god with that authority and duty, which is something that a lot of people seem to miss. Whenever I see discussion about Enel online, there's a lot of confusion. A lot of people think he's a really flat villain in terms of motivation. And if I had to guess, I'd say that that's because there's a tendency amongst new fans to sort of blast through Skypiea, speed read it if you will, get past all of those frustrating speech bubbles and right into the punch fighting. But then once you get to all of that, you realize, wait a minute, why is he destroying the island? That wasn't explained. Which I think is also partially a sandwich effect of Skypiea being placed between the saga breads of Alabasta and Water 7. Skypiea tends to be considered the valley between those two peaks, and for a wide range of reasons that I won't go into in this video, doesn't quite get the attention it deserves. And as a result, neither does Enel. But I think he has an incredibly logical path to mass destruction. But we still have yet to discuss his actual ultimate ambition. At the end of Skypiea, we have a very left field motivation reveal for Enel, which is that all of this time his plan was to go to the moon, because he believes believes it to be a sacred divine world to be inhabited only by gods, to build his godly kingdom, which, to make the comparison again, is very similar to what Marijois represents for the world nobles. If you legitimately believe that you are a god, then it only makes sense that you would want to ascend into the heavens. So other than not reading his dialogue, the only thing that might hold Enel back in the area of motivation is that all of this is revealed quite late into the arc. And in this age of online media literacy and criticism, people tend to be very impatient and demand logical reasoning right from the get-go, and they tend to conflate their impatience with poor storytelling. Whereas I think it's okay not to understand why a villain is doing all of the things they're doing, so long as that eventually when it is revealed, it makes sense. And Enel makes all of the sense. It's a last-minute puzzle piece that completes the full picture of Enel, which we will then frame and hang on our One Piece story wall. So criteria number the third one for a superb villain is a compelling persona. And in this regard, Enel has a very captivating presence right from the get-go. Mostly because of that godlike fear that he instills in the introductory segment, but counterintuitively, it only gets stronger when we see his true nature because it turns him into a wildcard character. It asks, and I suppose answers the question of what would happen if you gave a flawed human the powers of a god? And that answer can be anything. He could do anything. I don't know what he's gonna do, but it's probably not gonna be good. Anytime Enel is on screen or on page, we could be about to witness anything from a devastating event to a lovely chat over an apple. In fact, one of my personal favorite Enel scenes is when he appears behind Robin and they have a tense discussion about archaeology, where Robin manages to fool Enel into confirming that the Golden Bell Tower exists, which firstly, great job by Robin, continuing to point out the flaws in this false deity, but secondly, I was on the edge of my seat throughout this entire discussion, because at any moment, Enel could have flipped. Robin could have said something to offend him, or Enel could have just gotten bored and zapped her right there. There was a very palpable danger here, and there always is, which makes Enel a very compelling presence to behold. He has a volatile range of emotions available to explore, which to me makes him much more interesting than your classic stoic evil villain guy. And Enel's aesthetics greatly assist this feeling as well. In fact, he is one of the most unique character designs in all of One Piece, which is saying a lot because this series has a lot of wacky crap. But then again, that's also the problem. Enel is in One Piece. And if anything's going to let Enel down in this category, it's that he's up against some of the most compelling antagonists in all of media. We're talking your crocodiles, your flamingos, your mochi men, and so many more. How is it even fair to be asked to compete with them? It's not, but Enel does his best regardless. But quite possibly Enel's strongest feature, and what he definitely has going for him, is one of the most satisfying defeats in the entire series, which is very important to me. If I'm not satisfied with a villain's defeat, then why did we bother to explore them in the first place? But Enel has one of, if not the most iconic defeats in One Piece, getting smashed into the Golden Bell with Luffy's golden rifle, sending the sound of the bell echoing all the way down to the Grand Line, and letting Mont Blanc Cricket know that the City of Gold was in the sky the entire time. So there's some symbolism here that would be reused with Doflamingo. Obviously, it's very fitting that Enel was beaten in the sky, as if being knocked off his godly pedestal. I also love that Enel was beaten by his own hubris, as he was the one who equipped Luffy with the golden fist required to take him down. And one of the most underrated satisfying aspects to me was all of the citizens watching Enel's body fall from the sky and seeing the Arc Maxim come crashing down and sinking below them. Let's just linger on that for a second. The Arc, built by God, is sinking. That's such a brilliant visual metaphor for falsehood. The only detriment is that Enel didn't quite have the legacy set up to make this hit as hard as other payoffs have. He was a villain introduced and defeated within the same arc. He didn't have the multi-arc buildup of Crocodile or the decade-long buildup of Doflamingo, which means that whilst I actually think that Enel's defeat is more iconic, Doflamingo's defeat is more satisfying because it put a full stop on so much that we'd been building towards over that decade. Again, it's not fair, but One Piece has stupidly high standards of payoff to compete against. And then there's my personal favorite part of Enel's story, which is his post-defeat character arc. Starting with Oda drawing Enel without his bandana, which revealed a surprising quantity of god hairs. But the really cool thing about Enel is that he is a very rare One Piece villain whose defeat at the hands of Luffy didn't leave him broken. He was beaten by Luffy, sure, but that didn't deter him at all, and Enel still goes after his ambition, and actually goes on to make it to the moon, and it changes him. Remember that old Enel's motivation was all about maintaining that natural order. And remember how he thought that order functioned. Land, sky, moon. Humans, birds, God. Humans shouldn't be in the sky, and gods, they should be in the sky, but like really in the sky, not the plebeian bird sky. However, on the moon, Enel discovers the truth of the world, which is that humans didn't ascend to the sky, they descended from the moon to the Sky Islands, and potentially even the Blue Sea, which means that everything Enel had believed to this point had been turned on its head. The moon wasn't the land of the gods, it was the ancestral home of the sky people. And what's worse is that once Enel got to the moon, all he discovered was more types of ungodly vermin to deal with, such as the incident with the space pirates. But he does find and activate a legion of automata, and essentially achieves his dream of starting a godly empire on the moon. I mean, just what an absolute boss. He gets to the moon, learns the harsh reality of the universe, and then decides, screw it, I'm gonna do what I wanted to do anyway. It's very Luffy-like. And in that way, I have a lot of respect for Enel. He's had a lot of world noble comparisons in this video, but his driving force is infinitely more impressive, and I'm very excited to see what Enel does when and if he comes back into the main story. But overall, as a villain, Enel aces a lot of criteria with motivation, satisfying payoff, and a great post-defeat arc. But I think he falters with threat level because of the idea that Oda wanted to explore, the cardboard cutout god. And whilst he is undeniably compelling, Enel has to go up against the big guys, and in the grand scale of One Piece, I think he falls just a little bit short. But that still makes him a definite A-tier villain in my books, which I think might actually be a lot higher than many of you were expecting. But Enel is a fantastic villain, and I'd strongly encourage going back and rereading Skypiea. But you let me know in the comments, where would you rank Enel, and which villain would you like to see ranked next?